Hi, everyone. Welcome back to session 2. I'm very personally excited for this one. This one is called Raising the Bar and Sharing the Power. Now, as we start this session, I just wanted to remind viewers to put your questions into the Q&A and to also check out in the To section where you can put your comments, whether or not you need to click on the button that says either host and panelist if you want to direct it to the host and panelist, your comment, or to everyone if you wish to reference anybody in the chat. Right now, I'm just going to hand things over to Fez Awan, who will be the moderator for today's session. Off to you, Fez.
Thank you, Larry. Much appreciated. Hope everyone can hear me and is having a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. I'd like to start off by introducing the panel members we have here today. So if I can start with Patrick, please.
Yes, my name is Patrick G. Certainly glad to be here, living in Richmond, Virginia, in the United States.
And Zahra.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zahra. I am from Toronto, Canada.
And finally, Cherelle, please.
Good evening, everyone. For me, I'm Cherelle Augustine. I'm from London, UK. Nice to see you all.
And myself, I'm also based in the United Kingdom, and my name is Fez. So I guess we'll get into it a little bit here. So generally, we'll be discussing things around the power dynamics in research teams. We're going to try our best as a group here, our participants, to share some of our experiences as well as tips and strategies to navigate issues that can come along when being part as part of a patient partner in a research team. Sorry, a little bit nervous. So I guess we'll kick off and start with some questions. So in terms of lived experience and expertise, where we bring our own lives into research teams. So for others, this is usually something that they learn or they go to school to learn about, whereas we're bringing our actual lives into it. So how do you feel this can be different for us as patients, patient partners? And I'll start with Patrick, please.
Well, thank you, Fez. I know for me, when you think about the power dynamics in the United States, there's a saying, nothing for us without us. So when you think about clinical research, in a long time, researchers have been coming up with biologics, medical innovation devices without the consultation of patients. Now, the dynamics has turned, and irregardless of how long a person has been in medical school, has been a researcher, the acronyms or the designations behind a person's name, that patient or the person with their lived experience and their suffering and their disease state is the expert in how they feel and what's going to help them. So I think if we can certainly get folks to understand that we do have power, and, you know, if there can be a really good partnership and collaboration fostered if everybody is able to come to the table to be able to work together for the good of creating better innovation for better medical outcomes.
And to Cherelle, if you have any input.
Yeah, I'd like to add that coming from the UK, obviously doctors study for 10 plus years and they generally have this kind of opinion of they know best. And what can you tell me that I don't already know? However, you may have been studying for 15 years, 20 years, but I'm 38. So I've got 38 years lived experience with my condition. I have sickle cell disease, which affects your red blood cells and can lead to organ failure, damage. So what you would find that on the research teams, you're dealing with these same doctors and physicians who have all these accolades after their name, and they come in with this attitude of they know best. However, one thing that always I seem to get across to them is when I say, this is your job, but it's my life. So if you do something that ends up ending my life, I'm done. Whereas you can get a new job, you can move on with your life. And that seems to really resonate, and just really respecting that, yes, you can know the blanket idea of how a condition is supposed to be, but with sickle cell specifically, and other chronic conditions are very similar, it affects individuals differently. So how it affects one person might not affect the other. And I have a circle of people that have grown up with a sickle cell, and we've all gone through an array of issues that we haven't experienced together. We have certain things that we have the same, like having a crisis, but I've had strokes from the age of 12. My friends had a hip replacement in the 20s. You know, all of us have almost died at some point multiple times in our life. So there are things such as protocols that you would give. Like for me, I can't have morphine or codeine, which is a kind of the standard treatment. So being able to listen and understand that sometimes you might have an idea of how you think you're going to deal with a patient in your clinical study, in a clinical setting, sorry, but it might not work for that patient. So that's the same kind of attitude you should go into when you're going into research projects with people, and you're going into the community to speak to the people, that what you think might work for them doesn't actually necessarily work for them.
Zahra, if you have any input, by all means, please.
Yeah, to
But
just add on to that, as you know, others have already said, like at the end of the day, you know your body and your condition best. And while yes, physicians and researchers have, studied the disease and studied the organ systems in depth, the whole point of collaborating with patient partners is for that lived experience lens. And you really shouldn't shy away from, voicing your opinion. It's the same way in doctor's appointments. Like it's 5 minutes of their time, but that can impact you for the rest of your life. And you're the one living it, not them. And it's important for researchers to take into considerations like those challenges that you face. And the only way they'll really become more aware about that is the more that you're able to share.
thank you, guys. Much appreciated. Moving on to some more questions here. So sometimes being a patient partner, it can have a real mental toll on the people, given that we're bringing our lives into this. Can you share any of your thoughts or experiences here? And whoever would like to start, Patrick?
Yeah, Fez, I can address that. So I suffer with chronic kidney disease. I lost my kidney function to type 2 diabetes, and been living with a transplant for the last 7.5 years. But I will never forget the first time I wanted to participate in a clinical trial. It was while I was doing dialysis. And of course, going into the dialysis unit, I let the facility administrator know that I wanted to participate. But then a couple of days later, when I go back in to find out, if I got accepted into the trial, because this was like the beginning of how they was going to utilize telehealth in treating chronic kidney disease, especially for those that was on dialysis. And the facility administrator told me that I didn't qualify to be in the trial because they could not make money off of my medical data. So she told me in these simple terms that he who owns the data owns the patient. And because they couldn't make any money off of my data, I couldn't participate in the trial. Now, imagine this was back in 2013, but imagine now having an invitation to sit at the table, and you get to the table and there's a saying that says, he who owns the table is in charge of what's served. So imagine getting an invitation to the table and you get there and nothing is conducive for you at that table. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. You're devalued, you're disrespected. When you try to tell them about your lived experience, you get cut off and you almost feel tokenized, or as a person that's a checkbox, for researchers to say, well, we got one, we got a patient. So we really don't need to hear what you're saying. So imagine the anxiety from that, the grief, the rejection, the stress, the worry, on top of dealing with historical mistrust and things like that. So it can certainly have a terrible effect on your mental health and your well-being. But luckily, times are changing, but there's no consistency in this area. And I would certainly encourage those that are in the audience, as well as those that are on the panel, to continue to fight for your voice, because if you don't advocate for yourself, who will? And though you may have a caregiver or care partner, and they can certainly do a good job, you are actually living with your affliction. So you know your good days, your bad days, what's going on with you, but you have to do it, because if not, there will be no progress, and there will be no good medical outcomes going forward.
And to the other panelists as well, please. Go with Zahra next, if you want to share.
I think I'll pass over on this question. Thank you.
No problem.
I've got something to add. So we in the UK, we had the first nationwide patient experience survey for sickle cell disease. And we reached over 1,500 children, young adults, parents, and we got feedback about, it was looking at emergency care settings, specialist settings, and how their experience was. And we were being published, and it's in a peer review. The results were used to publish a paper in a peer review publication, and the feedback we were getting from the people that were reviewing it was saying, well, because we're supposed to get pain anesthesia within 20 minutes of reaching A&E, but many of the times the staff in A&E aren't aware of these guidelines, and some patients aren't always aware of it themselves either, because no one has told them. And so when they've said that they've been waiting over 20 minutes, they've waited hours, the feedback from one of the peer review people, which really could challenge your mental health, was saying, well, maybe they just think they were waiting longer than 20 minutes because they were in pain. So even though you've had over 1,500 people or more, I think we had maybe 3,000 people, they still were questioning our experience. It wasn't just one person saying it, it was multiple people that had said that they don't receive the treatment that they're supposed to receive within the timelines given, but they still wanted to question, and it was very degrading to read, because it's saying, no matter what we do, we jump through all the hoops to get enough for it to be classed as an established review, but they still want to question the opinions that came out on it. Now that is something that can make you, so I knew that the patients necessarily know about this feedback, but because I work for the Health Research Organization and I was privy to that information, as a patient with sickle cell and knowing all the effort we went through to say, have some random person decide, oh, we're not publishing your paper because we think it's just an illusion in their mind that they're not getting the treatment, and they don't want to persecute the frontline staff and the system that is in place for not doing what they're supposed to do. That can really damage your mental health, your will to continue working as a patient advisor in these situations, to be putting yourself on research teams, because it's very undermining. And patients as individuals have that kind of feedback given to them, like, oh yeah, but that's just your experience. Or they take what you say as it's the same for every single person, you represent everyone. And which is something that's very common in the Black community. We always get compared to one person is like, that does something, it represents everybody in the Black community, and when it's nothing like that. So it can really hurt your heart to know that at professional levels, even though you've done everything you're supposed to do, and there have been many other patient experience measures, like for cancer, for cystic fibrosis, and they've never received pushback like that. And we've had to go to, in the end, we had to go to another paper to publish, but it's just heartbreaking. It makes you feel like you're losing the will to live, losing the will to move on. And it was the same for all the researchers on the project. It was the same for the doctors working on the project as well. It was very disheartening.
I think for myself, I was born with CKD too, and I've been quite fortunate that I've not had too many issues with researchers. Initially, when I started to engage, I did a little bit, and it did feel a little bit tokenistic, and it made me feel a bit disheartened. But generally, because I was born with CKD, I've been learning about my own condition and also myself, and also how certain processes work. So I think now, for me anyway, I try as much as I can to stay as professional as I can, obviously, but not able, basically to be able to go and challenge certain things if I feel they're not right or they're not appropriate. But yeah, during the start, it was quite hard, especially when it felt very tokenistic and I was potentially the only South Asian member there. So it did feel a bit weird, I guess, a bit strange. But then over time, I've learned how things can work, or sometimes when they don't, who to go to talk to, etc. But that was just my little experience, I guess. And as mentioned, even though people may have the same illness, not everyone's experiences are going to be the same, even with the same illness. So I think that needs to be remembered, I guess, when we take part in these things, and sometimes people forget that. So at the end of the day, I guess researchers and members of research team at the end of the day are also people. And sometimes they bring their own biases to a discussion about patients and patient experiences. Some of us have also experienced racism at times and gaslighting. And these are important things to bring up and to talk about when we're talking about power and what to be aware of as a patient partner. So I'd like to ask if you are comfortable about sharing your experiences here, Zahra, in regards to this theme.
Yeah, I think this is a really hard thing to navigate, especially when the doctors that you're seeing, in clinic or in the emergency room are the ones who are gaslighting you. And then you're joining a research team and they're those same faces over there. And that they're kind of coming in with a certain bias. And in my personal experiences, like a few years ago when I started having a lot more GI issues, like it was always brushed off because I was a teenage girl. And it was so much easier to just, shove it under that rug. And then when I started doing patient partner work, it was really intimidating, especially at first, to kind of find my voice and share my opinion, because I felt like, oh, what if the people are going to, treat me the same way that they treated me in the clinic or in the emergency room or whatever. I have been pretty lucky that overall I have had good experiences being a part of research teams. There definitely has been a few cases where the research team has kind of had like an opposing opinion from the patient partners. And what I found best to kind of handle a situation like that was, if the principal investigator or the PI is like maybe really intimidating or someone that's like hard to approach, finding someone else on the research team who you do feel comfortable talking to and kind of being able to voice your opinion with them, and then having that person take your concerns back to the PI has been a useful strategy for me. And the other thing is getting to know the other patient partners has been really important, because, all of you might have like a similar view and kind of have like a united front against the rest of the research team. And that can really help to voice your opinion.
Moving on to Patrick.
What Zahra said is so true. And I noticed that somebody had put in the chat about medical gaslighting. But there is a similar term that has only been around for I want to say about the last 17 years, and it's known as epistemic and hermeneutical injustice. And epistemic injustice is all about how your knowledge is valued or devalued during interaction. It goes beyond miscommunication, and it's all about systemically being overlooked or being misrepresented. And it really happens in clinical research as well as anywhere else, but really in clinical research. As you heard when Zahra shared her lived experience, as you heard earlier when Cherelle talked about her lived experience, Fez, even you talking about your lived experience, I believe we've all been in situations where when we try to communicate the things that are happening to us, here again, because people see your affliction before they see your humanity. And that's one of the issues when you think about that. So from epistemic injustice, you get what's known as hermeneutical injustice. And hermeneutical injustice is being in a situation where you're trying your best to convey something that is deeply personal, but the words that you're trying to use and the concepts tend to get misconstrued. It gets misconstrued to the point that the hearer of what you're saying is thinking that you're lying. As an example, in the United States, as a person of color, as a Black American, when I tell somebody that does not look like me about my experience with the police, they may blow me off and say, oh no, man, we're not trying to hear another Black problem again. So imagine in a clinical setting, when I tell folks about, I'm not really sure I want to participate in a clinical trial because of historical medical mistrust, talking about Henrietta Lacks and the use of her cells, or the Tuskegee experiment where they withheld penicillin from all of these African-American males that really needed this and they ended up dying. And or it could be talking about J. Marion Sims, who's supposed to be the father of gynecology, but you saw some of the medical atrocities and when he performed these surgeries on enslaved women without using any anesthesia. So when you are trying to convey your personal experience, it can get lost based on your appearance, your disease state, your academics, whether you have them or not, the neighborhood you live in, the zip code that you're in, these things can be misconstrued. And also within there is something else known as testimonial injustice. And testimonial injustice is the same thing that we've been talking about. When you convey your testimony, people will be prejudiced to you just based off of race, gender, sexual orientation, and identity, disabilities, all of these different things. They will disbelieve you before they even allow you to finish. So until we can remove medical gaslighting, medical microaggressions, hermeneutical, epistemic injustices, and start creating value-based, empathetic communications and more humane treatment toward each other, the system isn't going to change.
Okay. I was just thinking about recently, we had done a project where we spoke to the community members within Northwest London, and there was a representative that's heavily in the community, understands the community and what they need, and she was expressing within the video why there's a history of people from certain ethnic backgrounds that are scared to get involved in research, where the fear comes from. And it was talking about how this project that we did is a great way to engage them. It opens the doors for conversation and it brings them back into the fold. But the people that I don't want to get myself in trouble because I work for them. But NIHR just heard that quote, that one little line, and they took it personally. Like they were talking about them. They weren't the ones that didn't engage. They were the ones that created the fear. And it wasn't about seeing the bigger picture. And it took a lot of meetings for them to get to the point where they didn't want to take it out, because it was a very important point to make to represent the community. It's important to know where we were and how we're going to get to where we need to be, and the work that you've got to do in the middle. And there's a lot, like Patrick has mentioned, there is a lot of stigma. So for sickle cell in itself, there's a lot of stigma. So as a male, if you come in, most people with sickle cell know their care plan at the back of their hand. If you come in saying, I need morphine, I need X amount of morphine, how many mils, they look at you like you're a drug addict. If you're a woman or if you're a person that comes in screaming in pain, they see that they think you're aggressive. Whereas if you're a woman that came in labor, they know that the pain is due to being in labor. If you're at school as a child and 1 minute you're fine and the next minute you're in excruciating pain, you have your peers that might be looking at you and the teachers that look at you like, oh, they're attention seeking. I've many times growing up been sent back into the playground in pain, where with sickle cell, you have to treat the things head on right away. But I was sent back to the playground 2-3 times till it got to the point where it spiraled out of control and I ended up in hospital. That could have been something that was avoided. Whereas a child with asthma, they can understand that with asthma, 1 minute you're fine, next minute you're not. So it's like, why is it that there are certain patients that you look at them and you can't understand how 1 minute they're fine and next minute you're not? And sickle cell is one of the most prevalent genetic conditions across the whole world. So it's not like it's something that they try to make it like it's only a Black disease. It affects mostly people from African origins. There are a lot of people, yes, that are affected with it from African origins, but the Greek Orthodox are affected by it. It's very much in Europe. It's in places where there was higher prevalence of malaria. That's the link to sickle cell. But in certain countries, they coin it like a Black disease. So it already puts a thing where, well, it affects the minority. So if you're in Europe, oh, you're the minority. So we don't have to think about how much research funding we want to put into it. And it's just, the discrimination is subtle sometimes. So in the UK, they've really been able to make the institutional racism very subtle. It's not as in your face as in America. You see it's very in your face, still in a state of very in your face. In the UK, they've really managed it well, where it's institutionally you're being pushed out. Institutionally, you're being questioned and made to seem a certain way. And it's just about trying to get that message across. It's like, as a Black person saying these things, it's like, oh, you're just complaining. It's you're playing victim. And it's not about playing victim. It's about sharing your truth, especially when you articulate it in a way, I'm not complaining, I'm not being violent, I'm not being aggressive, I'm being very straightforward and factual about what I'm sharing with you. Some people still can't get their minds over that. So sometimes you have to build allies and have other people like from other races start the conversation and mention these things. And then other ears listen. So it's about understanding how to build allies, understanding where you're going to get the conflict and the backlash, and how to work through that together as a team, together with other patients. As numbers, when you come together as numbers, if you come together, they have to listen. And that's one thing that a lot of communities don't understand, is they think, oh, what's the point? Nothing ever happens. And I do 100% understand that, because where I was as a baby with things where with sickle cell, it's not that much far forward now. A lot of things, a lot of issues are still very much the same. Yes, there are more treatments now in regards to trying to work towards a cure, in regards to trying to improve quality of life. But the core issues that affect the everyday person is still very much alive as it was when I was born. I'm fighting the same fight my mother fought when I was a baby. So it's disheartening, it's hard, and sometimes you just want to step back and say, I'm done, what's the point? But there's so much more to learn. There's so much more to do to grow as individuals. And I think one thing is understanding how your words as an ally, even if you don't mean to say things a certain way, can induce anxiety with your peers that you're working with, can induce using acronyms when you're having a discussion with them and they don't know the acronyms. Don't do that. Use plain English. Eventually they may pick up acronyms, but don't put barriers in the way that will make the patient voice that's on your panel or that's in your team shut up. Because what they have to say is so valuable. And most people that work with patients at first, even if they're resistant, once they finally work with them and see the good work that they can do, they are the biggest advocates out there. So take your time to think about barriers that you're creating. So if you've approached a group of people and the focus group are very angry, don't be like, oh, they're angry, we're never going to get anything out of them. Try to understand why they're angry. Where does this history of anger come from? Give them the space to get that out. And then you acknowledge what they say. You talk like a therapist does. If you need a therapist in the room, you get them to convey what you're saying so you're on the same page. And then you will be able to move forward with the objectives that you have set for your focus group. And that's just some tips on my side.
Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate that. So this question has come from the audience. Do you think there is a difference in the role or the experience of a patient partner versus a caregiver partner? I'll open that up to whoever wants to go first, by all means.
Fez, it just depends. You can be a patient and a caregiver. You know, as an example, you can be a person, well, we're all living with some form of affliction. So let me just say that we're all patients in one right or the other. But if you are a parent, a grandparent, if you are taking care of a loved one, you have a dual role. There are caregivers and care partners that advocate harder in some circumstances than patients, especially if the individual is incapacitated, if they aren't able to convey their feelings in a manner that they would get the appropriate care as possible. So it just, in my opinion, it just depends on the role that they're playing at that particular time. But we're always patients and we're always caring for somebody. So to me, it's a dual role. But the primary caregiver is the one who really, they lack a lot of resources for support. To me, I wouldn't be here without a care partner. And a lot of times when you think about care partners and the burden that they have to live with, not only caring and taking care of somebody else, but maintaining a career, if they have a career, maintaining that balance between self-preservation, self-care, and mental health. For caregivers and care partners, I would tell you that self-care is not selfish. It is necessary. Sometimes you have to sit down and rest and be refilled, refreshed before you can continue to try to care for somebody, because you can't properly care for somebody if you're on empty. And there's a number of folks that actually do that because of the sacrifice they want to make and the love that they have. But at the end of the day, you really need to sit, refresh, relax, get yourself together, because if you don't and you're gone or you get sick, I doubt if there's somebody that's going to come in to be able to fill your role. So I just think it's a dual position, just depending on the situation.
So for my own experience, I guess, because I was born with CKD, my main caregivers were my family, my parents. I think something they struggled with at the beginning, especially when I was very small, was language. So they came from Pakistan and we moved to England. My mother's English is a little bit better than my dad's, admittedly. But yeah, learning these new phrases, these new acronyms, understanding what these blood tests were for, what they're looking for, why they're testing their child, why they have to leave their child alone, can they not stay with their child? And then also I had other siblings. Also, my dad had to go to work. And it's just not, so from a parent, I guess, it's navigating family life, it's navigating work, it's navigating trying to understand this whole new language, I guess, when you enter this medical world. And it was very tough for them to begin with. Thankfully, it's less now. And I've also been learning as I've been growing up. But I think, as you've mentioned, it's multiple roles they have. Whether it be a parent, a grandparent, older sibling, etc., auntie, uncle, whatever it may be, whoever is your caregiver, wife, husband, etc. And generally, sometimes there are things that aren't thought about for those caregivers. So they need rest, they need self-care as well. They need to process what is happening to their child, their loved one, whatever it may be. And I think sometimes people forget that and they concentrate on the patient a lot, which is understandable. But we also need to think about those family members, those caregivers, those parents, brothers, sisters, etc., and try to educate them along the way, so they understand what's happening to their little brother, their little sister, whoever it may be, in a way that's appropriate for them. So how someone would speak to my mother was a little bit different to how they speak to my father, for example, or my siblings. So I think there is a difference, and the situations are going to be different for everyone depending on their circumstances. But from my lived experience, at least, that's what I've learned and been told. And when I've had conversations with my parents and my older siblings and how it was for them and aunts and uncles and things that have been living around myself. And it sounds really tough. I mean, now obviously I'm an adult and I try to take care of myself properly. But yeah, hearing their stories and the traveling to and from wherever your hospital may be, that again is something, depending how far the hospital is. Another thing to consider, can they afford it? Can they afford the petrol? Can they afford to go visit their child or their loved one, whoever it may be? So there's a lot of different layers when you're a care partner, I guess. So yeah, I personally do think they are different, and it needs to be something that we think about a lot more when it comes to our care partners.
I'd like to add that your caregiver is the first person, especially in the role of a child, to teach a child how to be heard, to teach a child how to be listened to. Because if they command explanations, if they command that you speak to the child and not me and ignoring the child in the room and explain what's going on, if they command that you understand the priorities of what your child wants to do in their life, to communicate how this treatment or how staying up on with your medicine will allow you to do that, it really changes how they grow up as an adult. It changes how they advocate for themselves. I was fortunate enough that my consultant was Dame Sally Davis. She was Professor Sally Davis at the time. She's one of the leading people within sickle cell disease. And she always spoke to me. She was always factual and straight to the point. She didn't sugarcoat anything. There was one point when I was not taking medication, she told me straight, for chelating iron, and she told me straight, if you do not do this within a certain amount of time, you're going to be dead. And it's those kind of conversations that teenagers appreciate. It might be scary. You have to always couple it with like psychology, having a psychologist available for people with long-term conditions to speak to when they receive difficult information, when they receive changes within their condition. But a caregiver is the mouthpiece, even as an adult. If I'm in hospital and I'm in full crisis mode, I cannot articulate what my care plan is. I can't even sometimes articulate where the pain is. In fact, sometimes you constantly asking me what my pain score is infuriates me, because it's beyond 10. There's no 1 to 10, it's beyond 10, it's 1,000, it's 1,000,000. Stop asking me, it's not changing, I'm in pain. Whereas, and as an adult, when you're on adult wards, they don't want to let your parent in or your caregiver in outside of open hours. But there are ways to speak to ward managers and let them understand that this person, I need to be there. If you're not here washing them brushing their teeth in the morning and feeding them and waking them up because they're drugged up on the pain medication, they're not gonna get better. They're not gonna get out of the system. So you need to, if you're not gonna do it because you are overrun, you need to let me come in and look after the basic needs of this patient, of my family member. And it's about being able to have those conversations. I recently became a mother 3 years ago, and even like my son has sickle cell trait, all my children will have sickle cell trait, which just means they're carriers, but there's things coming out about carriers of sickle cell that never existed before, like stuff to do with if he's into sports and he's overly exercising, he can have a heart attack spontaneously on the spot and die. These things never came out before. So it's like I'm still having to learn about not only my own condition as it develops, but how the trait could affect my son. And that's met with clinicians that still say, oh no, sickle cell trait does not affect your child, they just carry the gene. Some people with sickle cell trait have as much pain as someone with sickle cell, full-blown sickle cell disease. So it's advocating for my son in other areas and thinking that, okay, I've suffered so much, maybe like God's not going to give me a child that's going to have to suffer in another way or in any kind of way. And then you're met with stuff like speech delay. You're met with conversations of your child not hitting milestones, and you feel guilt as a caregiver. You feel like, even though you've done everything, it's got nothing to do with you. You feel this intense level of guilt. You feel this intense level of responsibility to fix it. You feel like if you're not banging down the doors, nothing is going to happen, because a lot of the time parents are scared to overstep the mark because they're scared that their child is going to be mistreated when they're not there. They're scared that they're going to be put at the bottom of the list for something, because that also comes from a history of negative experiences within the community. And I understand that my mum felt the guilt for passing, because my parents didn't know my mum didn't know she had sickle cell trait until she was pregnant with me. Tests went done like they are now with every person born. And I know my mum felt intense guilt. And having carers or caregivers on panels are important because they are able to articulate things that sometimes the patient, no matter what their age is unable to articulate. But it's also important to understand that we as patients feel guilty as well for the pressure that we put on these caregivers, the pressure that we're putting on our parents, the pressure I put on my partner. Do you know how many times I've told him, you know what, you can go be with someone healthy, normal, have a normal life. You don't have to. I've given him an out so many times before I had my child. Obviously, there's outs not available now. But it's just because you always in a position where you want to feel like you're protecting the people that you love from you. And you know it's not your fault, but your condition is part of you and you feel like you're trying to protect them from you. I used to hide that I was in a crisis until it was at the peak of uncontrollable. Because I saw when I almost died I was 7.5, 8 years old. I went on holiday with my gran and my 3 uncles. I caught a simple little sore throat on a plane. And that led to me almost dying in the Caribbean because it escalated to an infection and my blood level dropped to a point where people are usually dead and I had to have an emergency blood transfusion. I saw the men in my life, grown men, break down crying. I saw my gran's hair turn grey within days. And I know that was because of what I was going through. And that's when I started to hide. I became very aware of my mortality in that moment, but I also started to hide when I was sick. I tried to deal with things alone, but you can't deal with things alone half the time. You need somebody to understand what you're going through in case it becomes a medical emergency. So when you are working with patients on focus groups, give the patient, if their child doesn't matter, the opportunity to choose the location where they feel comfortable to talk to you, whether or not they want their parent available, because they will not say certain things in front of their parents or caregivers because they don't want to be a further burden. So you give them the opportunity to speak freely. Otherwise, you're not going to get the full picture. But you also need to take the time to speak to the caregiver because they will see things that someone going through it won't necessarily see.
Anything you'd like to add, Zahra?
I think I completely agree with both Patrick and Cherelle's points. And you know, I'm in my early 20s. I don't have an experience ever as a caregiver, and I don't feel like I can do justice to that role that's both, you know, so much love and so much hardship. But one thing I do want to touch on is I really agree with Cherelle's point on how the caregiver is that first point of contact that teaches you how to advocate for yourself. And, you know, in my own experiences, I turned 18 right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that meant that I was moving over to adult health care. And I turned 18 and I had a 2-month hospital stay in the adult ward. I had never been there before. And my mom wasn't allowed to, you know, be there with me all the time. And it was a really challenging shift from being in pediatrics where my mom was there, you know, 24/7, and suddenly just like a month later that wasn't allowed. And I think that that's really where that caregiver role, like what all that she taught me throughout my life, really kind of had to like unleash itself, and I had to learn to be my own advocate, with still the support of my mom, because, you know, like I think there's a certain power that a caregiver has and the way that they can advocate for their kid. But yeah, I think that was a really good point.
I think you really touched on a very important point, where there are some people who are born with a condition or get it very young, and they have to, I guess, transition from pediatrics to adult care. That can be a very emotional and weird time, having lived through it myself. And I think there needs to be some kind of work there, I guess, to try and help that transition across, especially for those young people who are going through that kind of section in their life, because also they'll probably be, I'm guessing, going through, you know, different educational stages or different levels of where they're growing up, and things like that, and their hormones will be going crazy, and then they want to be normal, and they have to go for hospital appointments, and then trying to explain to your peers why you're different. And it's a multitude of weird feelings around that time from what I remember. But yeah, it's an area I guess we need to really try and help those people who are going through it as much as possible. I did have a question here from the audience, and I can't find it because there's loads of scrolling to do. So if anyone has seen it, that'd be great. I shall find it. One moment, please. Sorry about this. Okay, another question to Patrick, please. From my lived experience with MS, multiple sclerosis, I question that the pharmaceutical industry and researchers do not like to hear from patients. Do you not think they like to stick their heads in the sand on purpose?
I think the landscape, depending on where you're at, the landscape is starting to change. And I believe that was one of the first areas of change is when pharmaceutical companies kind of figured out that they can't make any effective innovations, medical devices, anything biologic without patient experience. But if you are really having a hard time trying to get a pharmacist or somebody in the pharmaceutical industry to listen to you, I would certainly go over that individual's head and talk to their supervisors. I would also use social media to get your point across, because here again, a lot of folks want you to tap out. They want you to quit. But when it comes to patient advocacy or just advocacy in general, this is where you have to be the most resilient. Here again, this is your health. And something I've said for a long time is that you have to learn to go from being a patient to a pupil. You have to go from suffering to being a student, from affliction to academics. You have to do your own research. So when you finally have your meeting with the physician, you know, specific questions and details that you want to ask them. Because if not, you'll just take what's being told to you and run with it. And, you know, Fez, just like you said, we may have the same condition, but all of us came about it in a different route. And though we all suffer, we don't suffer the same. So again, I would advise you to do that, and hopefully you can rectify the situation with pharmaceutical companies.
Another one from the audience. What can we do as researchers? What can we as researchers do to make your experience as patient partners better? Whoever would like to go first, you're more than welcome.
I got a sermon on this, so somebody else might want to go.
I think, oh yeah, Fez, go ahead, Fez, because you haven't spoke very much today.
That's fine. I just think generally open communication. I know it sounds very simple and very easy, but it's not always done. There are some great experiences where it has been done really well, but then also when I initially started doing engagement, I guess, not so much. But I think, yeah, having a safe space where you can express yourself fully and properly. I guess, please don't invite us to be a tick box. There were some early occasions where they wanted a South Asian, so I was there talking South Asian. And then I quickly learned, okay, that's what they were doing, and I was going to say no to these things. But yeah, I think very simple things of, I don't want to be your token. If you want to invite me to things, that's wicked. But make it a safe space, make it an open space. Help me to attend it, whether that be online or whether that be in person. Because I personally, with the cost of living in the world, you need support, whether that be a bus ticket, a train ticket, etc. If it's very far, could you get overnight accommodation to help them? And I think trying the simpler things first, and having them regularly and routinely done, would be a really great start, and it would help that rapport, and then you can hopefully build on from there. But simple basics really do help. Go on, Cherelle, sorry.
No, you just had me thinking about lots of things there. I would think, first of all, you need to understand why you want to work with us. And make sure that if you're planning to work with us, plan from the beginning, plan from application stage, plan us in financially. We are valuable, invaluable. There's no one else within your field that can give the same or equal opinion around patient experience than patients themselves. So think about what your institution has as honorariums that can pay patients for their time. Think about if they have to travel, pay for their travel. If they have to eat while they're with you, either provide a meal or pay for the expenses of the meals that they purchase. If they have to stay overnight, pay for their hotel, pay for their travel back home. Do not put everybody in a big category. So you can say, oh, I'd like Black people on this research. No, you don't want Black people. Do you want people from African origin, Nigeria, Ghana? Do you want Caribbeans? Because even within the UK, so we've got people that are come over from Africa, we've got people that have come over from Caribbean, but then you've got Black British that have origins to each different ones. We were raised completely differently. We education-wise, we achieve differently. Our experience is different. The mindset of someone that's come from Africa will be a lot different with how they see themselves, because they haven't grown up in an institution where authority figures are introduced to them as white people, Caucasian people. We haven't been, when we go to history class, as someone that's grown up in the UK as Black British, the history that you get as Black history is you were slaves, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They're kind of adapting now So my point is, okay, so there was no history, British history of Black people before that. And then you're teaching me American Black history. You're not teaching me British Black history. There's Moors that were in the UK. There's so much Black history within UK that they do not share within school. So your mindset from the get-go when you're being taught to is you are less than. And the things that you see are athletes on TV. You see musicians on TV. You see dancers on TV. So what they're going to aspire to. Where are the business people? You know, your mindset is completely different when you come from somewhere where all you see is your culture. You understand your roots. You understand how your education was topped here. And then you come to the UK for something as like maybe university, or you come to settle here with your family. Your mindset, your children's mindset, your discipline is so much different. The parents are generally a lot more financially stable when you come from a position from certain African continents. Not all of them, but sometimes that is the case. So you can't think about, oh, I just want this subject of people. Really break down who you want to speak to, what community are they from, what's their postcode, what do they like to do, where can we meet them? Is it someone, am I going to meet people in churches? Am I going to meet people in mosques? Am I going to go to the youth clubs? Am I going to go to schools, or am I going to see them in the hospitals? Really break it down and understand, how do I reach the people that I want on my project? Why is it that I want them there? And then how do I make them feel valuable? Because you're also going to come across people that have been a tokenistic part of something and they're not really interested. And then when you are working with them for a certain amount of time, because patients are the only people, the more experience that you have, that you're then less than. So you become the usual suspect. Oh, we have heard your opinion now. We kind of don't want to work with you, want some fresh roots. No, think about what have they learned? How can I build their skills up? Can I put them on this training course? Can they be the project manager for my next research project? Elevate the patients you've worked with, give them the opportunity. Some people might not want financial reimbursement, but offer it. Give them the opportunity. They might not want to become a project manager on your next research project, but give them the opportunity to apply for it. Because we're not just our condition, we have education, we have background, we have experience, we have life skills. So elevate us. And if you want to then utilize us to bring fresh meat in, yes, we know the community. We're part of the community. We can bring people in, but do not disregard us where the more experienced we are, we're less valuable to you, because that demeans everything that you built with them along the way. And it makes them, people that have been very engaged with you, disengage in the future. And it really smallens your pool. And then you're going to also be attracting people that are going back to the same issues because they've not been part of it. You don't know, they don't understand how this works. You're starting again. You need someone there to be a mentor to them. So see them as an asset, see them as an ally, see them as a team member, see how you can elevate them. Just like you're going to go for a promotion, just like you're going to apply for this post, offer them the same opportunity, because they're not going to necessarily hear about it unless you tell them.
If you'd like to, of course, add anything.
I think all of Cherelle's points are great. I think the biggest thing is compensation. Involve your patients from the start when you're doing those grant applications. It is our time, our energy, it's a mental toll, and we deserve to be compensated for that, or at least be offered to be compensated for that. And outside of that, I think like listen to your patient partners, like truly listen. Don't just, have your focus group or your workshop to check off that I did this and okay, I can move on. Truly listen to your patients, take what they're saying into account, and keep them updated. I've had so many experiences where, I'm involved in a workshop and then I never hear from them again. Like, what was the end result? Keep us updated along the way. And really try and get a diverse group of people. Like here in Canada, most of the patient partner things that I've ever been involved in, like they're always from Ontario. We're never getting the rest of the Canadian perspective. But yeah.
Thank you, guys. I think we've got time for one more question maybe, and then we're going to have to pass back to Ray. So do you have any advice for people when things become too much for them as part of a project or an initiative? Cherelle, if I can go to you first, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I was actually asked to do this panel last year. and mentally I was not in a place where I could deliver. I probably would have showed up on a day and delivered very well, just like I'm doing right now, not to my own, but just I would have been able to step up to the plate. Well, I had lost my friend that's basically my sister that I've known since 12 years old, who also has sickle cell, to cancer. And what I lost in her was more than my friend and my sister and my relative. It was the one person that I confide in about sickle cell who understands what I've been through as a past person. And we've grown together. I lost my son's godmother and I lost my mental health. I became overwhelmed. I had anxiety attacks. It was a roller coaster. Every time you think you're over the grief, it hits you. Even now, it still hits me. And I had to be my son was one. I had to be a parent still. I had to still show up for him. And then he regressed right after she died. He regressed in his development. So it was hard for me I felt so much guilt saying no, but I had to do it for myself. I had to do it for my mental health. And even now I'm emotional because recently I lost my grandmother. She's the last matriarch in our family. And pushing through, even though we present ourselves, like right now, I'm not actually well, but I present myself well. We put a mask on to deliver so we can make a difference. We're sacrificing our mental health. We're sacrificing our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, because we feel responsible for the weight of making changes, and not for us necessarily, but for those coming up. And understanding that things come back around. There's always going to be that you have to look after yourself. Like Patrick mentioned earlier, you have to look after yourself. You have to take time out. You have to listen to your body, and you can always come back. And for people in the positions of researchers, don't just chalk someone off. Dawn came back to me and asked me again. I wouldn't have reached out again because I feel like I let her down with not being able to do it. And look after yourself, but also understand opportunities will come. Opportunities will come. It's not on you. It's not on you to save the world. You contribute to it. We all contribute to it. Everybody in this room contributes to it, but it's not up to us to save the world. It's not all on you. And that would be my advice, is to understand that, like I said before, it's your life and it's their job. Your life, you're not going to get another one back. So look after yourself.
Thank you, Cherelle, for being so open. Really appreciate that. Very quickly, I guess, from myself, because we are running out of time, learn to say no to things. I guess it was more eloquently put by Cherelle, but there are times where I guess we need a bit of a break as patients or caregivers, and it's okay to say no. I'm going to very quickly ask Patrick and Zahra for their comments because we are running short out of time. So whoever would like to go first, whether that be Patrick or Zahra, then we will have to pass back to Ray.
Hey, Fez, I think you and Cherelle, that was a mic drop. So I'm just so happy to be a part of this this conversation. So thank you.
I was going to say the same.
Thank you guys so much. I've really appreciated being part of this and being invited to this. I am going to pass back to Ray because I think we are running a little bit over, so apologies to people. But thank you all.
Not a worry at all, Fez, and thank you so much to you and to Cherelle and Patrick and Zahra for all of your thoughts and vulnerability here today. I have nothing else to add myself other than just the usual host duties, and just to say thank you for your participation today, but also to mention to the audience that we will be taking a break for 30 minutes and we'll be getting right into session 3.